Kwa wale waliozaliwa miaka 70 na 80, saa 6 mchana lile jua ndo imekolea. Unafanya nini wakati hii muziki inapiga? Kabla sijamkaribisha mgeni wetu, nataka kwanza ni set mood, kwa sababu I am already, yani tayari nimesharudishwa back in time. Kwa hiyo nataka na wewe uweze kurudi, uweze kupumzisha mawazo yako na kurudi back in time na just to enjoy the moment. So kakitako, ngoja basi nimuingize mgeni wetu. Thank you so much kwa kutujoin leo hapa kwenye Jiongeza Podcast. Labda kabla sijaenda mbali nikupe muda wewe kujiintroduce ili wasikilizaji waweze kujua wewe ni nani na your whole background just a little bit kabla tujaanza kuingia tena kwenye maongezi mengine.
Kwa jina naitwa Aziza Ongala, ni mtoto wa Remmy Ongala. Na tuseme nimeingia kwenye, mimi mwenyewe sio mwanamuziki, lakini nafanya kazi na wasanii. Na tangu 2011 nilivyorudi nyumbani kutoka Uingereza, kutoka masomo, nilidecide kwamba, actually siku decide, it just kind of happened. Kazi ya kwanza niliyopata nilivyorudi Tanzania ilikuwa kwenye events management. Kwa hiyo nilikuwa nafanya events, different types of events, corporate events, embassy events, this kind of thing where people were looking for entertainment or whatever. Kwa hiyo nikaingia kwenye hiyo sector na nikaanza na DJ events pia. Na kupitia hivyo nikapata chance ya kufanya kazi na kampuni ambayo ina deal na muziki. Basically tulikuwa wana deal na sound. Kwa hiyo kupitia equipment za sound ndo nikaingia kwenye live music tuseme. Na nika discover that I actually enjoyed it. And then 2015 I had the chance of basically curating and directing an international festival in Bagamoyo. Tamasha lilikuwa linaitwa Karibu Music Festival, na tukamleta Papa Wemba to Tanzania for the first time. And that experience was actually the experience ambayo ilinifundisha, oh, I actually like this and I can do this. And kuanzia hapo ndo nikaingia kwenye hiyo sekta ya sanaa officially. Na mwaka 2018 ndo ulikuwa mwaka wa kwanza relaunch tamasha la baba ambalo linaitwa Ongala Music Festival. Nikirudi nyuma kidogo, baba alifariki 2010. So 2011 at the time nilikuwa naishi Uingereza, lakini tukarudi Dar es Salaam kufanya tamasha la baba, lakini wakati huo lilikuwa linaitwa Ubongo Fest. It was very, very tough kwa sababu tulikuwa tunajaribu kuorganize tamasha wakati tunaishi nje. So 2018 relaunch tamasha la baba ambayo hata jina nikabadilisha likawa linaitwa Ongala Music Festival. Ukiangalia kwa tamasha bado ni changa kwa sababu tunafanya tu mara moja kwa mwaka, lakini pia ni significant kwa sababu kufanya tamasha Dar es Salaam sio kitu rahisi. It's very challenging. Support kidogo ni ngumu. So in a way we've survived 5 editions. So that's positive at least.
So una play any instrument?
No, unfortunately sipigi chombo chochote. I actually nikifikiria I regret not learning because baba alikuwa anajaribu kunisukuma kujifundisha chombo, na nilianza na saxophone lakini nilikuwa siko serious, so I never took it up seriously. Yeah, so no, unfortunately.
I'm sure watu wengi wana wonder, what does it feel like kujua kwamba babako alikuwa ni huyu msanii mkubwa? Kwa maana kama umezaliwa miaka ya 70 na 80 ndo aliyotukuza miaka hiyo yote, na mpaka miaka ya 90 of course bado muziki wake unapigwa haswa Radio Tanzania. Walk us through being mtoto wa Remmy.
Good question.
Ama yani wewe ndo mtoto wake pekee, wake wa kike pekee?
No.
Ama yeah.
So okay, sisi tuko watano officially, and nasema officially kwa sababu you know my dad, kuna watoto wengine ambayo pia tunajuana lakini wakulelewa na mama na baba. So nikisema officially I mean waliolelewa na mama na baba, na nikimaanisha hivyo sio manake wote ni watoto wa mama na baba pia. So tuko watano. Wa kwanza ni Jessica Ongala, then Ongala is my brother. Mimi ni watatu, niko katikati, Aziza Ongala, then kuna Tom Ongala na Shema Ongala is the youngest. And us five were like raised by mom and dad officially. So I do have, kuna watoto wengine pia wanajulikana, tunawajua ambayo wako nje ya ndoa. So I will put it that way.
So wewe kama mtoto wake ambao umekuzwa na yeye kabisa nyumbani, kila siku unamwona baba, kila siku unamwona mama, unaona jinsi anavyofanya kazi zake za muziki, unaona jinsi anapotoka huko nje anashirikiana na watu, na jinsi alivyokuwa ni mtetezi wa watu wa hali ya chini. And then kuna mambo mengi aliyokuwa anasema ambayo kama ukirudi nyuma leo ukiwa unaangalia, Remmy alikuwa yuko open sana kuhusu muonekano wake yeye, kuhusu maisha yake. Yani, na I think that's the way alikuwa anaweza kuconnect na watu. Uwe tajiri, uwe maskini. Somehow you just connect with him because he just had that thing. For you as mtoto wake, wakati, what did it feel like? How was it? In the house, outside, all that stuff. How was it?
Yeah, so kusema kweli, like kwa sisi, I think unajua when you are a child of whoever, it's just normal because it's your life, right? Huyo ni babako, huyo ni mamako. You don't really think too deeply into the experience, but kwa sisi na wadogo zangu na kaka zangu na dada yangu, it actually alivyofariki, I feel like hapo ndio we got to understand what an impact he was, and what a great, I mean, we knew he was a great man because he was very generous, and also my mom, both very, very generous people. They would give you their last shilling in their pocket. Without a doubt, they wouldn't even think twice. That was my dad, and that was my mom as well. So they were both similar in that way. And I think this is why probably my mom survived the marriage because, you know, my dad was a superstar in many ways. Now, you know, superstars attract many, many different things, good and bad. But I think at the core, those values were the same. So they were able to navigate through their relationship. And for us, you know, no family is perfect. Always kuna madrama za kifamilia ambazo wote tunazijua. So it was normal, but we didn't realize how much of an impact he was until he passed because of the outpour from the people. And, you know, we were just like, okay, why? He wasn't just our father. He was, you know, he was everybody's father, really. And yeah, and so even me ending up in the industry that I'm now working in, if mgeniuliza miaka ya nyuma, well, never would I have told you I'm ending up in the arts. Like I wanted, you know, to get as far away from the arts as possible when I was growing up, because I was like, you know, you almost don't have your own life being part of, you know, my parents' lives and my dad's music, and his life was everyone's life. So we never had that sense of privacy or anything like that. That was non-existent for us. So nilivyokuwa mdogo, that's what I craved, because I am also a person that likes time on my own. And being in such a family, that was very limited. So it's interesting now for me when I look back, because I feel like I've come full circle, and almost like my childhood was almost grooming me for what I'm doing now.
Kitu kingine nilichokuwa nataka nikuulize, which I think it's interesting. Kwa hiyo wakati mko nyumbani, wakati uko mdogo, kuna wakati labda band, you know, alikuwa kwenye bendi kubwa Super Matimila. Ilikuwa ni bendi kubwa. Kwa hiyo I'm sure labda saa nyingine walikuwa wanakuja nyumbani, wanapigia nyumbani, wana practice nyumbani ama nini. Yani kulikuwa na vitu kama hivyo, ama ilikuwa nyumbani ni nyumbani, just family?
Oh, ilikuwa yani nyumba yetu ilikuwa open for all. Mazoezi yalikuwa yanafanyika kila jioni. If it wasn't my father rehearsing, it was my older sister, kwa sababu dada yetu mkubwa naye kuna wakati aliingia kwenye sort of like dancing show business back in the day. So sisi tulikuwa, we had an open door policy. We had people for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like, there was no such thing as privacy. And my mom, who was a British woman, but very much adapted the African culture, she used to actually say there's no word for privacy in Swahili, which I haven't yet found. So yeah, kulikuwa, we had, you know, people, all types of people, not just musicians, but, you know, professors, philosophers, just all types of people. So we were exposed to many, many types of people. Now, nikiangalia, I actually appreciate that, because I think that was a gift in itself. But at the time, as a child, you're not concerned with all that. You just want, you know, you either want your parents' attention for yourself. You just wanted to be normal, and we were everything but normal. You know, we even grew up with monkeys, baboons, all types of, you know, animals. So we just weren't normal. And what I wanted as a child, you just want to fit in and feel normal. That was not us.
Yeah. So kitu kingine pia labda tungependa ushare ni katika muziki yake yote, kwa sababu umesema kwamba wewe ulikuwa unaona tu ni muziki, anapiga muziki, ulikuwa hujui how big he was, ama yani just his, you know, power around na watu ambao amewagusa na anawagusa, ama aliokuwa anashirikiana nao na kuwagusa at that time. Ila wimbo gani sasa hivi ukiangalia nyuma unasema wow, that was my favorite one, ama ule wimbo unanigusa mimi kutokana na kitu hichi na hichi na hichi, kwa sababu kilikuwa kinatokea at that time?
Nyimbo yangu ambayo naipenda ni Narudi Nyumbani.
Yeah.
Na
my favorite too.
Yes.
That's my favorite too.
Good. And na hiyo ni because when I was in the UK, or when you're away from home, when you listen to Narudi Nyumbani, it really resonates with my spirit, which I think it resonates with a lot of people being so far away from home. Lakini Kipenda Roho pia is one of my favorites, because lyrically speaking,
hamna nyimbo yake moja, yani ndo nasema hapo ndo mali palipo pagumu. Hamna nyimbo yake hata moja unaweza kusema labda yani nyimbo ndio maana nilisema hapo mwanzoni kwamba yani alikuwa anajua jinsi ya kuwagusa watu in so many different ways.
Yeah.
Yani just how, alafu alikuwa anajua when to sing what. Umenelewa? Yani people just feel it.
Yeah. Now his live performances, they were very different to his recorded stuff. So his recorded stuff is amazing, but when he performed live, he was very explosive, and you know, he was fierce enough to talk about anything and everything he wanted to talk about, which, you know, for a lot of Tanzanians, I don't think is, you know, we're very much conservative. We hold back a lot. And maybe that was the part of him that showed that he wasn't actually native Tanzanian, because he had that way that he could just communicate without fear, of whoever, of the government, or, of that. So, but you only got that in his live performances. He was a lot more, controlled with his recorded stuff. Lakini still, it was very, very, powerful. Kipenda Roho to me is very, like, lyrically speaking, it was very, very smart how he put the words together and how he builds the picture in your mind, So yeah, I agree. I think a lot of his music, what makes it very powerful is basically the content. And it's the content that we can all relate to at different levels in our lives. Hata kama umetoka kwenye umaskini au kwenye utajiri, kutakuwa kuna nyimbo moja ambayo lazima ita resonate na wewe. So that just shows, what a creative artist he was.
Yeah. So nyimbo zake ni yeye mwenyewe alikuwa anaziandika ama ilikuwa ni bendi nzima inaandika? Alipokuja Tanzania ile miaka sabini mwisho,
Sabini, yeah.
akaingia Tanzania na Watanzania wakamkubali na wakampenda na akaendelea kuishi Tanzania, yani kama tu Mtanzania. Kuna wakati wote alishasema labda muda umefika, nataka nirudi nyumbani, ama muda ukifika, nataka tu nirudi nyumbani Kongo, ama Tanzania ndio ilikuwa nyumbani kwake?
Tanzania ilikuwa nyumbani kwake. Alikuwa, yani yeye ni mbele kwa mbele. That's what he would say. Like he would never look back.
Oh, wow.
So hata mimi nakumbuka nilikuwa namuuliza, baba utatupeleka? He was like, no. Kama ukitaka utaenda mwenyewe. So for him, when he left Congo, he never looked back. And I think pia he fell in love with Tanzania. And pia I think the reason why he was accepted so much by Watanzania kwa sababu he traveled extensively all around the country at a time where there was barely no roads, no communication. Sio kama huko wakati huo kwenda Bagamoyo would take you 4 hours just to get to Bagamoyo. And now it basically takes you, what, 45 minutes to drive to Bagamoyo. So it was a different time. And in that time, yeye na bendi yake while he traveled extensively. And wherever they went, however small the village was, however big the town was, he gave his whole. And he would take the time to learn the dialect, to learn the language. And then in his live performance, he'll incorporate all of that in his show. So he really was able to win the people over, very much so, through that. So no one ever questioned that he wasn't one of them, you know, that just came naturally. Once he won them over, the rest was history.
Right.
Na kweli sasa hivi nikiangalia mziki wa Kitanzania au mziki globally, it's a very different time. Like, and even with the artists that I work with now, I do encourage them to do the road trips, to do the legwork. I think it brings the band closer together when you go through, you know, that kind of stuff, all that drama brings and adds more to that creativity. And for me, Pia, because I'm actually a curator now, when I'm listening to artists or bands or to whoever, I can always tell, like, these guys, you know, within the chemistry, you can tell they've been together for a long time or they haven't been together because you can see. So that kind of chemistry, you can't fake it. Na sasa hivi kwenye industry ya mziki Tanzania, mziki hauko hivyo. Kila mtu ni, tuseme, instrumentalist. Kwa hiyo unaweza kumpata mpiga gitaa mmoja lakini anapigia bendi kama 4, 5. Unaelewa? Kwa hiyo kuna ile chemistry ambayo inapotea pia kwa sababu amuishi pamoja, mli pamoja, yani ni biashara. Unaelewa? So that is very hard to recreate.
Yeye alikuwa na kama as a family na bendi yake.
Oh, kabisa. Like, really and truly, they were a family. Na pia kwenye upande wa mtunzi wa mziki, yeye, he was a lyrical genius, to be honest. It was very much him. Sometimes, kuna a few songs aliwapa write some of his musicians and some of the people he worked with, like kama Chidumule, ule mwimbo wa Dodoma. Lakini the majority of that song was written by my dad, but I think aliona too, kwa vile yeye, he was not native. So that song, I think for him, morally speaking, he felt that Chidumule should own it rather than him. But definitely speaking, he was the main composer and writer of all his music, for sure.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So katika watoto wake wote, nani amechukua the whole hymn?
So I would say, for me, I never, if I wanted to get into music, I could have. Like, I've never, because I experienced maybe fame, that kind of fame that my dad had, which even nowadays, I don't think you can see it. Kwa sababu ukiangalia hata bongo flavor artists, sasa hivi, Diamond Platnumz, Harmonize, they would walk out on the streets, but, you know, they will have their bodyguards and everything like that, and they make a big show of all of that. But my dad, he didn't need a bodyguard. Like, he would literally just walk outside and people would just start following him. And I think this is why especially me and my brother, we had trauma for crowds. Like, we didn't like crowds when we were kids because of the experience of being with my dad and just being out with him and just the people that would just follow. So I find it funny now that I actually do festivals, because tulivyokuwa wadogo, summer holidays was like, okay, go where dad's going, which was usually a festival. And again, we'll be full of people. And so I really, really didn't like crowds. I didn't like those situations. So it's very interesting to me now that I'm in this business, because I really, really didn't think I would end up here. Not in my wildest dreams, I would be working in the sector that I'm working with artists, But I guess we are more of our environment than we like to believe.
Right. So ulikuwa umeenda Uingereza kusoma, and then alifariki unasema 2010. Wewe
Yeah.
2011?
Yeah. So mi nilikuwa naishi Uingereza bado. Alivyofariki nilikuwa bado niko Uingereza. Move back home 2013. So that was a couple of years after he passed.
So wakati bado uko Uingereza, mawasiliano yenu, unajua mara nyingi watu wengi wakiwa nchi za nje, mawasiliano na nyumbani na mahusiano na nyumbani yanakwepo, lakini yanakuwa not as close anymore, kwa sababu huku na maisha mengine unakazana nayo na wao huku na maisha yao, yani you grow apart a little bit. So, wewe ulikuwa una maisha ya aina gani as far as kuconnect na nyumbani bado nakuwa yani very close, ambayo ulivyokuja kusikia kwamba amefariki, it just meant different for you? Ama did you feel like, well, life still has to go?
Actually, baba aliumwa almost miaka 10 kabla hajafariki. He was diabetic. He was diagnosed with diabetes in his early 40s. And obviously he never followed the diet, or, like, he lived hard, he played hard, so he had 3 strokes before he actually passed.
Oh, wow.
Which is crazy, because usually unaambiwaga after your first stroke, you're not going to make it through the next one. So my dad made it to the next one and the third one, and then some more, and then eventually his pancreas just gave way. And it was sad at the end. So I think for us, he was sick for a very, very long time. And for anyone who's lived with someone who's sick, they understand, all the different emotions that you go through as a carer. Luckily for me though, even though nilikuwa nje, nilifungua mapema. So mtoto wangu wa kwanza nilizaa miaka 24. Na literally nimegraduate afu nikifungua. Na baba alikuwa anapenda watoto sana sana. So if anything, like, that really brought us very close together. And I think katika all the siblings, before he died, I definitely bonded with him the most, kwa sababu nilikuwa hata kama nilikuwa niko Ulaya, lakini nilikuwa nasafiri nyumbani, na nikija nyumbani na watoto nakaa miezi 3-4 afu narudi. Na nikija, at that time alikuwa tayari anaumwa.
Oh.
So he wasn't doing so much. So he would like harass me from morning till night. Like, when are you coming? Nikimwambia tu nakuja. It's the end. Like, he'll call me over and over again. And of course, at that point as well, he wasn't well. So he'll call me like, now, unakuja. I'm like, yes, that I'm coming. Then 5 minutes later, he'll call me again. So we really spent a lot of quality time together. And even though he was different, being sick and having a stroke, it changes you. Because when he had his first stroke, he literally was paralyzed from his left side down. It was very, very bad. And he had to learn how to do everything. Like, we would feed him, you have to tell him, close your mouth, funga mdomo, tafuna, swallow. Like, that's how bad it was at the beginning. So he really, he came a long way, but of course, he was never going to be 100% who he was. So he did change, but within the change, the essence of who he was still there.
Yeah.
And I feel that out of all my siblings, I was privileged enough to share more quality time, not quantity, but the time we shared together before he passed was really, really special. And I was so happy that he was able to meet like two of his wanyonge. That meant a lot. And he loved children so, so much. Like,
That's nice.
even as a kids, we were like spoiled rotten. If it wasn't for my mom, my gosh, I don't know where we would be right now. So, yeah.
So swali ni kwamba wakati anaumwa au wakati sasa vitu vinaanza kubadilika, ulikuwa unaonaje feelings zake? Yani alikuwa yuko resistant to kubali kwamba I guess I'm not the famous person anymore, or maybe I can't sing anymore, I'm not that Remmy anymore, which is what watu wengi wa sasa hivi, especially kama ukiangalia ma celebrity, inakuwa ni kazi sana, kwa sababu mtu ukishazoea kukaa kwenye hii superstardom, you still want that relevance somehow.
Yeah. That was, ilikuwa ngumu sana kwake kwa sababu akili ilivyoanza kurudi, dealing with his limitations, his physical limitations, also mental limitations as well. But the physical, I think akili ilirudi zaidi kabla ya mwili. Mwili never really recovered to what he wanted to do. So it was very frustrating for him. I think it's one of those moments in your life where you now realize who your real family is, who your real friends are, because then you know, like the people that are just there for the ride, they're gone. Then no one is there. So the people that are going to be there for you are the people that are, they are the genuine people, which, as we know, they're always fewer and far in between. So it was hard to see him go through that, for sure. Luckily, he had my mom. My mom was always by his side, but she also needed the support because now she's 100% caring for someone that is not well. The fact that he couldn't play his guitar, that was really, really hard to see him, like he'll be on the table for hours, like he's just stringing like the same like tune, and he can't do any more than that. That was really hard because he was not ready to accept that his physical limitations, like he could not be the person, he was. And I think this is why he went down the born again route, because they had a lot of time for him. Because as long as he was doing music, he didn't care what else.
Yeah.
Whether it was gospel or whatever, he was able to do music in the capacity that he could. So he still could use a little bit of his voice, and he couldn't, but the guitar, he couldn't. My dad alikuwa anapiga 12-string guitar, which is not, that's a pretty, and he was amazing at it, and he was self-taught as well. This is something that a lot of people don't know.
I know.
He actually, when alivyokuja Tanzania, he was a drummer, not even a vocalist. He was a drummer. He started with percussions, ngoma, ndo akaingia kwenye drums. So the guitar was something that he self-taught himself in secret.
Yeah.
My mom was the one that actually told us this, because watu waliassumed too he was a guitarist, but he wasn't. That came later, but he was so talented that he was able to master, the 12 string and play it, with his mouth, with his, he could, the guitar was his baby, basically. That hiyo ilikuwa ngumu sana kumuona kama kile kipaji chake kiliondoka, lakini who he was inside, he was still there. And yeah, this is the psychological part of illness and disease, that a lot of families have to go through, and it was a very difficult time for him and my mom and the family, but he still had a sense of humor. That was the good thing. We could still joke. I would still make jokes, and he could still laugh and shake his head. With my dad, you could talk about everything. You know, he wasn't that awkward African father where you felt like, oh, I can't talk about this. No, he was actually, he was known for just talking too much. So there were no limits to what we could discuss.
Right.
Yeah.
Kitu nikuulize was, and plus, thank you so much for just going through all that with us, ili tuweze tu kuelewa kwamba maisha yake yalikuwaje. Ila ulipoongelea, ili ni swali lingine ambayo najua watu wengi ambao walikuwa wanamjua Dr. Remmy ni kwamba labda walikuwa wanajiuliza. Yeye alikuwa, unajua alitoaga ule wimbo wake akanasema, sasa kama watu wanasema muziki ni matusi ama whatever, that's not fair. Mbona unaomba, mbona ukipiga simu redioni unaomba muziki flani, alafu baada akaja akaswitch akaingia kwenye mambo ya wokovu. Nimefurahi umeweza kuelezea hiyo kidogo, kwa sababu I'm sure watu wengi walikuwa wanajiuliza what happened in between. Yani kwa sababu alikuwa so opposite of that.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden to go into that, it was like, what? This doesn't make any sense. Unadhania mpaka muda umefika ambapo mpaka alipofariki, ni kitu gani zaidi alikuwa anaongelea zaidi, ama ni kitu gani ambacho alisema labda mumfanyie, ama yani just as a remembrance, ama ni legacy gani yeye mwenyewe tu alikuwa anaiongelea?
Swali zuri, alafu najaribu kufikiria kwa sababu the last couple of years I spent with him, I was a young mother. Well, I wasn't a young mother, but you know, I was a mother of two young kids. Kwa hiyo hata mimi maisha yangu yalibadilika in the sense. So I'm trying to think, what was it that he would have wanted? At that time, I think we knew he was very sick, and he was sick for a very, very long time, which I think is why for a lot of people they don't see where the ulokole came in, because they didn't realize in those 10 years he was pretty much, you know, isolated from everything he knew. And the people that had time for him were, you know, the church people, and they still pushed him to do music, which was really, really positive for us as well, and for him. And so I think the reason why akaokoka and everything like that is because this is what they felt he needed to do. And at that time, I think he was like, why not, you know? And we didn't see an issue with it at all, because at the end of the day, my dad always had a big heart. And, you know, of course, he's human, he wasn't perfect, but where it counts, his heart was always in the right place. So we were just happy that he found something that he was happy to do, and it kept him motivated. And somehow he felt that he was still attached to the musical side of life, which is really what he lived for. You know, I think if anything would have killed him, it would have been the ability of not being able to do music at whatever capacity.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah. No. So when you're asking me that question, I'm like, I don't think we ever had a discussion about it, but I think it was only after he passed that I started questioning myself and my life and where that was going to go. And I think the legacy, it just came naturally. It wasn't just me. It was at the time, it was my ex as well, who was in my life, and a few other people in my lives who were like, yeah, you've got this legacy, and you have to honor this legacy. And then the festival was born out of that. But in hindsight, I do feel that it's what he would have wanted me to do, or us, or someone in the family, one of his children. And katika sisi watoto, anayoimba ni mmoja anaitwa Tom Ongala, and he sings. So he sings my dad's stuff, and he performs every year at the festival. And he also performs all around Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. And then I am sort of the management behind the festival, and a lot of other artists as well. Because the festival is not only to honor his life, his music, and his legacy, but to provide a platform for up-and-coming Tanzanians or Africans to give them that platform and to celebrate artists like him. Na nikisema wasanii kama yeye, wasanii ambao wanatumia, kwanza wanaweza kuperform live, wanapiga chombo, wana strong connection to culture and heritage, kwa sababu that was very important for my father. He always used to say he was African before he was anything else. Even before he said he was Tanzanian or Congolese or whatever, he was African. And that was very important to him. And his African spirituality was also very important. Sisi wenyewe hata kama mama alikuwa Mwingereza, tulilelewa kiafrika. Unaelewa? And for me, I feel like if Africans don't make a conscious decision to preserve and celebrate our heritage and culture, then it's going to disappear. Yeah. I mean, think about the experiences me and you had when we were growing up. Our children are definitely not going through those experiences.
Right.
And I'm sure those things make us richer by many, culturally richer, that we've been through those experiences.
And I love how nimependa jinsi ulivyosema hiyo, kwa sababu we're just going back to kama ulivyosema wakati uko Uingereza, ukipiga tu ule wimbo na rudi nyumbani, you just start smiling and just missing and having those childhood memories, Alivyosema wengi wetu waliozaliwa miaka 70 na sisi tuliozaliwa miaka 80 tumekuzwa na Remmy. Yani nyimbo zake zinapigwa saa 4 ama saa 6 mchana. You already know it's lunchtime, you already know somebody, like it was just life. That was life.
Yeah.
Ni vitu vichache ambavyo vilikuwa vina stick kwenye brains zetu kama watoto, na sasa hivi tukiwa watu wazima. It's just beautiful memories.
Yeah. Definitely.
Beautiful memories.
Now we can appreciate it better,
Oh my gosh.
because we have the life experience to navigate and say, hey, oh yeah. And actually, Baba alikuwa anasema when he was on tour, alikuwa anasema, I come from a different planet. In my planet, we eat together. Back in those days, whereby watoto mnagewa sinia moja, chakula hapo, mnakula. Ukichelewa shauri zake. You snooze, you lose. That kind of upbringing of also just growing up outside and just going in the house to sleep. Like, we lived outside. We were climbing trees. We were. Unfortunately now, even in Tanzania and Dar es Salaam, our kids are not living like that. Everybody's in their own gated community, in their gates, these phones, internet, this was even before internet. So it was a different world. It really does feel like a different planet. Yeah. I remember, like, when there was power cuts, afu mnakaa hadisi.
I know. Do you know?
Like all that stuff.
I know.
That doesn't happen anymore.
Yani mimi na watoto wangu tukiwa tumekaa, I keep telling them this story kwamba tulivyokuwa wadogo, hata tukiwa tunaenda kumtembelea bibi, Moshi. Mimi bibi zangu hawakukaa vijijini. Bibi zangu walikuwa ni wale wa mjini. Lakini bado tulikuwa tunaenda vijijini kuona.
Yes.
Lakini yani ni ile the whole thing where mnakaa mnapigiwa story, mnapigiwa vitendawili, unakosa.
Yes.
Wanajaribu, yani. Yes. It was just so amazing. And I think that's the way, kama ulivyosema, to pass down our history, our cultures and traditions and stuff like that. So I always tell my kids how I grew up and how those things were just so wonderful and beautiful. We just had the best childhood. So do you think before he passed or while he was living, do you think he knew he was this amazing person? Do you think he knew he was this superstar?
Yeah, I definitely think he did know, at least at the peak of his career. I think he did realize, the impact that he had. And I think he was very happy with himself. Overall, my mom always says, he died at 64, which is really, really young if you think about it. But my mom always says in those 64 years, he did so much living that was probably twice the amount of an ordinary man would have done. And it's true. I mean, if I think about it, My dad never slept for more than 4 hours a night. He performed, him and his band performed 6 days a week. And an average gig would be over 6 hours. So you're talking about, 6 days a week, maybe, he pumzika on Monday, and the rest of the time he was performing, traveling. If he wasn't performing, he was traveling to perform. So yeah, he really, really did. And he lived hard, he was a big drinker. He would smoke on and off, he was a big personality. He really, really did live his life.
Yeah.
He loved, so, and he really had time for everybody. That was the amazing thing about my dad. Like, he had time for everyone. And how you do that, if you think about it now, it's almost like impossible to think about having time for anyone and everybody who wanted to talk to you, whether you were the president or whether you were the beggar on the street. So I don't think he had any regrets, to be honest, by the time. And he had, like I said, he was sick for 10 years. So he had a lot of time to reflect upon his life as well. Like, I knew his brain did not work the same way, and strokes kind of do that to you. But I still feel he was very deep and he was able to have those conversations with himself.
Niambie wimbo mmoja ama miwili ambao unaipenda.
Narudi Nyumbani is, ukiwa Mtanzania au hata ukiwa Mwafrika, ukiwa unaishi sehemu nyingine, Narudi Nyumbani, lazima mwimbo utaresonate with you. Sana sana kama unakielewa Kiswahili.
Yeah.
Kwa sababu ni ukweli.
Narudi nyumbani yo. Narudi nyumbani. Nyumbani. Nilipoamua nirudi nyumbani. Nyumbani ni nyumbani, hata kukiwa kubaya au kuzuri. Nyumbani kwetu ni nyumbani.
Kama angekuwepo hapa leo, what would be that one thing you would have asked him, or you would have wanted to talk to him about?
Wow, that's a good question. I feel like through the festival, I engage with him anyways, like, because the festival is always, it's such a roller coaster ride every year for me. So I think because I do the festival every year, I feel like spiritually I'm always engaging with him one way or another. So I don't know. Maybe the questions I would have liked to have known more about like heritage in Congo, because really we have only met one blood relative of my father, only one, and that's a story of its own. He decided to come to look for this was his older brother. He came to look for him in Tanzania, and he spent 6 years in the Congo forest because of the civil unrest and everything like that. So that's an interesting story. So when he finally made it to us 6 years later, and then he stayed with us for a little bit, and then he also got a stroke, funny enough. And then he lived with us for 5 years, then he went back to Congo. So what I would have liked to have, had more of a connection to that part of my family. But in reality, Tanzania was always home. I was personally born and raised there. And as Africans do, we have big extended family. It doesn't really matter if you're blood related or not. So I don't feel like I missed out on that. But if anything, there's always a slight urge of discovering that other part of who I am. Because with my mom, I was able to do that, very easily. And with him, we were, it was always Tanzania. It was never beyond that. So if anything, maybe I would be like, Dad, just, like a few pointers here and there if I wanted to go back and discover it more. But that's another project that I'm going to do at some point, is retrace my heritage back to Congo and actually see where we end up.
Besides your uncle coming, Unajua kama una aunts, you know, other uncles, so
I know that my uncle had children. Well, most of his children, I think, ended up in France, as they do in the Francophone countries. And unfortunately, at the time when my uncle left, I was already living in the UK. So, and my mom kind of lost contact with him, which is really unfortunate. But yeah, so really and truly, we don't know much at all. It's a mystery. When he left Congo, he was in his late 20s, mid to late 20s. So he was still very young. And when he left there, he was a nobody. You know, he was a street kid at one point because he lost his mom and father quite young. And then he ended up on the streets. And then it was just basically him and his street friends who were like hanging out at this local bar in Congo. And, you know, Congo is full of music, and they were sort of making their own instruments. And then eventually he was like discovered. It's like, okay, come play drums for us. And then that's how, you know, on the other side of, you know, of Tanzania, there was a guy called Makasi, who had his orchestra at that time in Tanzania. You know, the live music scene was vibrant, and you're talking about 20-piece orchestras, and, you know, the competition was, you know, and so the lead singer of Orchestra Super Makasi passed away under mysterious circumstances, which I often think that's a novel of its own. So Makasi now travels back to Congo to find someone who could replace him. And at the time, my dad was not a vocalist, although he would sing. But Makasi said, okay, you would do. And that's how he ended up in Tanzania. And then he met my mom, and the rest was history.
wow.
So yeah.
But let me
So
tell
when
you,
he left Congo, he was basically a nobody, which is probably why very few people would actually know.
yeah.
But I mean, my uncle came, so he must have heard something, right?
Right. All right, we're gonna switch gears here. We're gonna go to you and about you and your life and how this festival is going. And you did talk about wewe sasa hivi ni manager, una manage different musicians, na tulivyokuwa tunaongea kabla hatujaanza kipindi uliongelea how these two new musicians are going to be going outside to Europe and performing and, you know, live to these big festivals. Maybe let's talk about a little bit about you and what you do about this festival stuff.
Yeah, so basically the festival was established 2018, and it was a way to obviously honor my father's legacy, kumkumbuka, kumwenzi, na pia, most importantly though, create a platform for other artists like Remmy. We wanted to create a platform to appreciate artists that actually write and compose their own music and want to perform live and, you know, invest in playing an instrument. Kwa sababu, as a child of the 80s, we can definitely see where the music scene was when we were growing up to where it is now. There's a huge disconnect actually between the bongo flavor recording artist and the musician. And I think being a recording artist is great. It's a creative thing, you know, but I think there's a lot of, you know, that heritage or that experience, or what happened to the in-between. Like, there's fine having recording artists and bongo flavor, but what about this other side of music? This magical part of our history that actually brought Remmy Ongala to us. Where is it gone? Like the Barakam shares, you know, the Wananjenje, you know, these are authentically Tanzanian sounds. You know, and why aren't we, why is there no younger people doing it anymore? And the thing is, they are doing it, but the support is very, very hard for them to find. Kwa sababu amna hata platforms. Siku hizi ukimuuliza mtu Dar es Salaam where you can go and enjoy live music, it's actually very embarrassing because there's not a lot of places you can actually tell people to go. And most of these bands that are performing are probably doing cover songs. You know, so for me, it was like, we've got to revive this. We've got to bridge this gap. And it can only happen by providing a platform, but also a space for bringing the older musicians and the younger musicians and allowing them to come together and create. And, and I think really and truly, if we look at that on a bigger scale, it's a bigger African problem, because I think, a lot, especially with the eastern part of Africa, and probably even the rest of Africa, but our heritage, is passed on orally through music, through storytelling, through adisi, all of that. So when we are no longer, living with our elders, and this kind of information is not being passed on. So even on an artistic level, it's the same. So what happens, so this is why for me, it was important to honor my father, but also say, hey, hang on a minute, we have to create space to also honor the up and coming and support the youth that actually want to do this kind of thing.
Do you think there's interest?
Sorry?
Do you think there's interest?
Actually, there is a lot of interest. Definitely, in my experience, there is. It's just that there, a lot of these young musicians are not being given the time or the space and the acknowledgement to do what they do. Some of the artists that I work with are Tanzanian artists. They're recognized internationally, but they're not recognized locally in their own country. That's a big problem for me, because as an artist, you have to have a firm foundation before you can, you can explode, or at least that is the more traditional way of doing things. So we have to be that foundation for the youth to come up and actually go and represent Tanzania in a way that we can be proud,
So process itakuwaje ili kama ulivyosema, yani foundation yako inabidi ianze nyumbani. Yani kama ulivyosema, huu ni mziki pekee wa Kitanzania, yani uko very traditional, uko very unique, na uko very organic. Hizi types of voices na jinsi wanavyopiga mziki kama Remmy ama hizi Sikinde ama yani labda mnafanya nini ili kuweza kurudisha hii ndani ya nchi?
So tunafanya, so the first one is to create a platform. Now it's not a one man or a one woman job. It has to be a collective of people that come together, that see the importance of this. And organically, that is kind of already happening around the region. So we're just kind of plugging ourselves in there as a platform. But also peer workshops are very, very important. So at the festival, we always have workshops, but the workshops actually happen throughout the year. It's not just to the festival, whereby when we have a specific project, we bring together like the older musicians and the younger musicians, and we say to them, hi guys, let's have a conversation, let's talk, let's do what artists do. And then whatever the product is, we showcase it at the festival. So there are many different types of activities that we try to put in place to encourage that organic interaction to take place. But of course, it's very challenging because we're working in a sector which does not have money. It's not commercialized music. It's not sexy in that way. And it's not what the so-called youngsters have been exposed to. So we are basically fighting for our space. But with the festival, because the festival has many, many different elements, what we find is that when the young people actually attend, they're very much inspired. Nice. And they understand through that experience, because this kind of music is something that you have to experience. Like we can look back and say, yeah, I remember when I heard this song and blah, 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 because it takes you back to a different time. And so for the young ones, there are still some of them that their parents were listening to Remmy Ongala, so they may not know who Remmy Ongala is, but they may know a song or something might awaken something within them. And even if it's not Remmy Ongala, it's literally, drumming, drums, ngoma. These are such essential parts of being an African, not even a Tanzanian, it's across the board. So just exposing our, I would say, urban youth to this, when we were growing up, kulikuwa kuna mdundiko. Sijui kama unakumbuka mdundiko, if you were ever in that kind of environment where you were allowed to be part of that. But, you know, where I grew up in Sinza, they used to have that kind of stuff. And it was crazy, but, you know, now I can look back and think, yeah, because it was like probably where the carnival culture actually came from, you know? And it was like when Mdundiko comes, it doesn't matter what people were doing, wamama wataacha chakula jikoni, they grab their kangas, they're there. And then God knows where they find themselves in the next couple of hours. But there is that feeling that has been lost. So I think for us, it's about reawakening that you know, that passion, which is there. And I think it's unfortunate when you have talented Tanzanian artists who may be recognized abroad in the international world music scene, but they're not known in their own country. That's crazy for me. And there's a lot of that. There really is a lot of that. So we're trying to do our part, working with the government, working with stakeholders, and also just trying to stay alive ourselves, you know, because it's not a glamorous business.
Oh, it's so funny how umeongelea mdundiko kwa sababu just the other day nilikuwa naongea na rafiki yangu. Basi kwanza tukuongelea muziki kwa ujumla na how, because I'm a really big part of culture too. Yani kurudisha our traditions to honor, not kurudisha, our traditions, what defines us. I always say this, wewe your culture and tradition, your language, hata kuongea tu Kiswahili sana. What defines you as a person, umenelewa? So, tukawa tunaongelea, rafiki yangu akaongelea kitu kinaitwa singeli. I guess it's a music, yani instrument, whatever, yani muziki unavyopiga. So then I had to go into that ili kusikiliza to, okay, how does it sound? And I was like, oh my gosh, it makes so much sense. I do know this. Na sio vibaya enjoy Western cultures and world and all that stuff. I think it's amazing because so it's the interaction and it's just the whole coming, you know, it's the world is a village, right? But nadhani kama ulivyosema, yani to honor our own stuff first, and then you know, Western stuff is like comes second. Right? So I think you're doing such a great job. Kama mfano kuna kama mfano kuna wasanii labda wanataka kuwa contact ama wanataka kufanya kazi na nyie ama watapenda kufanya kazi na nyie ama watapenda kuonyesha vipaji vyenu kwenu, how do they go about it?
So for now, really and truly, for my email, and actually even my phone number is out there. So because we don't have the capacity to do like a call for artists like some major festivals do, because you have to have a jury, you have to sit down. If you get 500, 300 applications, you have to do those applications justice. We don't have that manpower currently. So usually most of the curation is based on my own experience and contacts and networks within the region, not just in Tanzania, but regionally speaking. And they are a group of people that are actually working, me included, are working on creating an East African tour circuit where we can have artists from Uganda travel by road all the way down Baka Dar es Salaam and get to perform at various venues, and vice versa, giving that exposure for Tanzanian bands to do the same, and Kenyans, and having that interaction. Because I think that interaction is what is going to make us richer in one way or another. And, you know, I think when people are exposed to good music, they're going to love it, because music is such an important part of our, you know, our foundation. Internationally, not just Africans, but worldwide, I think music holds an important part. So I think our music is a strong representation of who we are. So I think in Tanzania, it's all great that we have the bongo flavor, but I sometimes fear that bongo flavor has certain characteristics and elements which are not totally in line with who we are on a cultural level. You know, I think it's kind of a bit too risky now, and I think it's trying to keep up with the rest of the pop trend. And so there are a lot of different things that our youth are now being exposed to, which is, I guess you cannot protect your children from everything, but they also have to have a good balance. it shouldn't just be sex, drugs, and rock and roll, so to speak. There should be a balance to that. And that's my concern with the bongo flavor. So I think Singeli is a great example of literally, like, Singeli was born out of Mdundiko and that kind of genre, and it is very much street music. But again, it's like street music on steroids. It's like, and to be honest, like, the funny thing is when you hear Singeli, when they play it like publicly, you would be amazed at what people do.
I know.
It's very sexually charged music.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's funny, it's great, it's cool, but again, it's basically, I think, it's basically showing, it's a product of its environment. And I think it's a really, it's the kind of music that really illustrates exactly what I'm trying to explain to you here. So I'm all for Singeli, but again, I'm like, okay, so it's not just bongo flavor, it's not just Singeli. There is a lot of other genres within Tanzanian music that has roots all around Africa, but it deserves its space, it deserves its platform and its respect. Yeah. And that's kind of what I'm advocating for. With mziki wa bendi, mziki wa dance, tuseme.
No, mimi napenda sana mziki wa bendi. I think it's amazing. Yani ile, inaleta watu pamoja, watu wana enjoy. People get so excited to go. Lakini kitu kingine sijui, as far as Dr. Remy's mziki, as far as his archive, I don't know how you're archiving his music. Ni nini utapenda kuachia this new generation? I mean, music people, artists.
Yeah, so actually this year, the conversation has come up over and over again. And so his music, I'm talking with his old record label we've been talking about it for years, actually, about re-releasing some of his, maybe doing a best of Remmy Ongala compilation or something like that. But also I'm very interested in actually offering his music to up-and-coming artists, young Tanzanians who want to maybe recreate or remix or redo something. As long as it has integrity and the family is involved in the project, we're very much open to that. And actually, I think for this year as well, we also want some of the artists that we're going to be curating for the festival to do a rendition of an Ongala song, as as a way of also giving people access to good music to work with.
Yeah.
And keeping it going, because that's how you keep something going. You sometimes have to reinvent,
right,
yourself. And so I'm very open to that. I think that kind of started happening many years ago, but then it kind of, the Tanzanian music landscape kind of changed when the recording industry was developed, and then hip hop as authentically we know it was, there was a bit of a hip hop culture in Tanzania back in the day after the recording industry was developed. But I feel like it didn't last long enough, and then we kind of moved into this bongo flavor scene, and then things kind of took a different turn. So I think there's space for more of that to happen, and I think as a family, we need to advocate for that, so that young people can also feel like, yeah, they can get to play around with this music,
So when do you have the festivals?
So this year it's going to be the 12th and 13th of October. We may keep it in October, and we're only doing it 2 days as opposed to 3 days. Again, we're having to cut down on costs, but hopefully we will still make an impact of 2 days as opposed to 3.
And when people go on your website, I assume you do have a website, they should be able to see all this. Wanaweza kuona information yote.
Yeah, so yes, we do have a website. I'll share that with you as well. And all the ticket information, the lineup and everything like that is shared there. We do have an Instagram page as well. Again, the capacity has been very small, but we are hoping to, to catch up with what we need to, because we are actually growing now. And we're like trying to keep up with, the growth.
Okay.
So yeah, we're getting there. I can send you all that information, no problem.
Yes. That would be great. Na nitaweka hiyo information yote hapa chini. So kama mtu unataka kuwa involved kwenye festival, make sure unaangalia hapa chini ili kuona kwenye ili kuona hiyo ratiba yao ikoje na ni website gani unaweza ukaenda na Instagram ili kuwa support. Thank you so much. Sana, ubaki salama. Kama umeyapenda haya maongezi ya leo, basi naomba ushare hii link kwenye social media zako na pia bonyeza hiyo like button hapo chini.